57 years ago, Fredrik Barth founded the Department of Social Anthropology in Bergen and Norway. It is no exaggeration to say that the history of the department is inextricably linked to Fredrik Barth as a scholar, a public speaker, ethnographic field worker, and academic writer. During his years at the University of Bergen, he built a strong anthropological milieu in Norway, and he made a lasting impact on anthropology internationally. In 2015, we celebrated 50 years of anthropology in Bergen by establishing an annual Fredrik Barth honorary lecture. Fredrik Barth died a few months after the first lecture, and we're glad he lived to know and experience that we inaugurated an annual public lecture in his name. In doing so, we wish to honor Barth and make a platform for communicating anthropology. The scholars invited to give the lecture will represent some of the trademarks of Fredrik Barth's anthropological scholarship: the development of theory grounded in solid ethnography and based on participant observation, as well as a compassion to comparison. Our invited speaker here today is tied up to Fredrik Barth's early beginnings as an anthropologist. In 1951, Fredrik Barth went to Kurdistan, Iraq, joining an archaeological expedition with a plan to staying on to do ethnographic fieldwork when the archaeologists left. He was then 22 years old and had previously only conducted a small community study among mountain farmers in southern Norway. During the excavation in Kurdistan, he established a network of local Kurds and the sponsorship of Babi Ali Sheikh Mahmoud, a prominent Kurdish leader. Barth visited Mahmoud's tenants outside Sulemania, as well as villagers of the Hamawand tribe, whom he had met during the excavation. He explored the transformation of community composition and forms of leadership. Rather than identifying a specific community or place as his object of study, as was common among anthropologists at the time, he became interested in processes and how to conceptualize variation. Barth's resulting monograph, Principles of Social Organization in Southern Kurdistan, from 1953, focused on rural people in villages exploring social structures, local politics, subsistence, custom, ritual, and small-scale economics. When he submitted this monograph to the University of Oslo for a doctoral degree, however, it was turned down. The committee in Oslo had asked Evans Pritchard about the process, as they were unfamiliar with the process of a doctoral dissertation in anthropology. And from Oxford, Evans Pritchard said he argued that 1 year of fieldwork is the minimum. Barth's 5 months fieldwork in Kurdistan was not thus considered sufficient. And so Barth took on another field research trip, leaving for the Swat Valley in Pakistan. But that is a different story. Uni Dikan, the widow of late Fredrik Barth, wrote me last week that Barth's fieldwork among the Kurds in Iraq made a sharp impression on him, which lasted the rest of his life. Fredrik Barth had a great feeling for Kurds and found the area to be one of the most beautiful he had explored. He took several photos during his fieldwork, which has been digitalized with the support of the University of Oslo. 70 years after Barth's fieldwork in Kurdistan, we are very excited to welcome Diane King for today's memorial lecture at the moment, which unfortunately has brought the Kurdish region again high on the international stage. The Kurdistan region of Iraq, Kurdish parts of Syria and Iran are being attacked from Turkey and Iran. And in this turbulent time, it is not less important to come to know the society in this region and its connections better. Diane King is one of the few anthropologists in the past century who has done participant observation in Kurdistan and who conducted research in Iraq during the Saddam Hussein's regime. Her focus on kinship systems, lineage, and patrilineage ties up with the early work of Fredrik Barth. In her wonderful book, Kurdistan on the Global Stage, Kinship, Land and Community in Iraq, she explores the household life in Kurdistan's town and villages. She shows us how people connect socially through patron-client relationships, gendered categories, and patrilineage. and the challenges deriving from the intersection of tradition with modernity. And I also have to add, reading it made me reminiscence my own time as a senior lecturer at the University of Hebron, Kurdistan in 2008 and 2009. And some of our students will surely be familiar with, in particular, with one of her articles, namely The Personal is Patrilineal, Namus a Sovereignty from 2009, which proposes a new model of namus, usually translated as honor. In Diane King's Barth Memorial Lecture today, we will come to know more about the role of patrilineal in current social relations among our interlocutors in Kurdistan, and how also it makes possible sectarian Iraqi citizenries. The title of the 2022 Fredrik Barth Memorial Lecture is Ethnic Groups and Quandaries, Thoughts on Modern States and Hereditary Belonging. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Diane King.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. I'm very honored. And I am a little jet lagged, but otherwise, I hope to share an hour of thoughts with you. Fredrik Barth went to Kurdistan, Iraq, and carried out 5 months of field work there in 1951, when he was only 22. Mid-century sociocultural anthropologists were interested in social structure, local politics, subsistence, custom, ritual, and small-scale economics. And Barth's resulting monograph covered these dutifully. His focus was on rural people in villages who he wrote lived quite differently from townspeople. His basic argument was that despite tremendous diversity in social forms, common organizing principles could be identified. The career of a prolific and influential anthropologist was off and running. In this lecture, I hope to honor Professor Barth and to take up where he left off, drawing on my own research in Kurdistan, conducted periodically since the mid-1990s. This lecture is about kinship, specifically descent reckoning, the state, and one of the main byproducts of kinship and state, sectarianism. In this lecture, before I go on, I want to thank the Department of Anthropology for bringing me here. The invitation was a long time ago, 2019, then something called COVID came along. I myself was hiding from COVID for my own health. Then I was vaccinated and I felt fine and ready to come. And we were going to do this last year, and guess what? I was not on the list of people allowed into Norway. You had to be a diplomat or some other things that I was not. So we again had to postpone it. It is really wonderful to be on the ground physically here and not doing this by Zoom, by the way, since so much is done by Zoom these days. It's wonderful to be in person with you. I want to thank Tone Bringa and Sinaba Bendiksen. This is how they're pronounced in American. Sorry. Especially for your support and for the invitation. It means so much to me. So I went to Kurdistan for the first time in 1995. How I got there is kind of a long story that I don't really have time to fit into the lecture. But I first met Kurdish people in San Diego. San Diego, California is the second largest Kurdish community in the Americas. I will tell you the first largest. Normally I make people guess, but this is a lecture, not a back and forth. I asked my students to guess. And I teach at the University of Kentucky pretty near this place. So they should know. The largest Kurdish community in the Americas is in Nashville, Nashville, Tennessee. First time I went to Grand Ole Opry, which is a place you should go if you're visiting Nashville. I went with my friend who had just arrived as a Kurdish refugee. So I started in San Diego, and I moved from there into the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Kurdistan region of Iraq is a part of the broader Kurdish homeland. Let's see if I can make this work. All right. All right, this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So many encyclopedias will not make this map, but the Encyclopedia Britannica was not right. This is from the 90s. So what I'm showing here is the areas of ethnic Kurdish majority. Okay, it's not the place where everyone who lives there is Kurdish. No, it's where the majority of the population in a given village or county or area is Kurdish. As you can see, it stretches across multiple countries, 4 main countries. And the one that I've done my work in the most is Iraq. I've also spent a lot of time in Turkey and Syria, coming and going from there. And I also am not going to tell you all the different ways that I got in, but at least 2 times there was a dinghy involved, a very small boat crossing a large river, and there have been other methods. Getting there is half the fun. Passing through Turkey and later Syria, I went to the part of Iraq that had broken away from or been abandoned by, cases can be made for both, the central Iraqi government in 1991. That was the year my country, the United States, went to war against Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein and his regime. Iraq is a product of the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the wake of World War I. And since then, it has been a strongly Arab state, at least from the point of view of the capital, Baghdad, and a majority of the Iraqi population. Kurdish Iraqis were first oppressed and later suffered horrific attacks, such as chemical weapons dropped from helicopters in the 1980s, culminating in 1988. Many governments have recognized these attacks as attempted genocide. I've carried out 11 research stints in Iraqi Kurdistan, now known as the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I'll switch back and forth. I went there most recently in 2016. Most of these stints have been short, but the longest one in 1997-98 was 11 months long, and that was after my 5-week trip in 95, which counts as 1 year. Evans Pritchard. I taught with his daughter at American University. They had lots of questions for her. That was fun. I'm slated to return in April, and I can't wait. It'll be my first trip since COVID. My method is classically ethnographic. I stay in host households, observing daily life, taking field notes, and I interview people in order to obtain more concentrated information. I have found Kurdistan to be a very warm and inviting place. I love to go there. It's full of helpful, friendly people. It is also a place that lives under constant threat. A couple of weeks ago, as I do often, I was scrolling through, in preparation for this lecture, scrolling through Google News. I put Kurdistan into Kurdistan, Iraq, into Google News. I wanted to see who is attacking Kurdistan today. Who is attacking Kurdistan this week? The list was very long, and virtually every hit was a different belligerent. Okay? the whole screen. Missiles coming from Iran, missiles coming from Turkey, internal attacks. It's very complex, and it's changing all the time. In order to know what's going on today, we must check today. I want to show you some pictures. This is the town of Acre around the turn of the century. This is a historic town. It's actually hard to find towns that look like this now because most of them have been leveled. I lost some of my innocence over this town because I said, oh, look at this beautiful, quaint little town to my friends who weren't from there. And they said, yeah, what do you think it means if a town is still standing? I said, oh, I don't know. What could it mean if the historic houses are still standing? They looked at me like, you innocent American, you. Obviously, it means they were aligned with the Iraqi government. Obviously. I did not ask a lot of people on Acre, so is this why your house is still standing? That would be awkward. But anyway, here we have a picturesque town that is still standing, and it's beautiful. Here is my street in 1995. I lived with a host family about 10 houses up from this scene. These kinds of scenes were everywhere. These are left from the Gulf War, from attacks between the Iraqi government and the Kurdish insurgents, known as Peshmerga, those who faced death. I asked people, how did this happen? People said, oh, he's on it. Who knows? There's been so much conflict. Which particular projectile landed at the end of our street? I don't remember, but I know they know when it was. But oftentimes you don't know where the bomb is coming from. Here's another bomb casing. This is in a village. This is their soccer field, football field. Sorry, across the Atlantic. I have to switch to football. These shells were everywhere in the early 2000s. And then people realized they aren't very useful. They're empty. And so they put flowers in them and use them for various different purposes. They're no longer out just lying around. They've been collected. Maybe they went to recycling, but they were all over. Kids were playing soccer. This is a picture of the Turkish military. I took a risk to take this because Turkish military does not want to be photographed. It's a little blurry because I was far away with a long lens. But this is in the town of Ahmadiyya in about probably 2002-ish. And the headlines had noted that Turkey had left Iraq. Okay, so the New York Times and other newspapers of record were reporting that Turkey had left Iraq. And I'm snapping this picture. Does this look like their own? So, occupation can take many forms, and sometimes it's a very traditional form, looks just like this. From the start, my interlocutors have talked about a few topics more frequently and with greater insistence than others. One is militarism and violence and war. Another is a desire to out-migrate. I heard this about every day. And the third main topic is kinship. That's our main topic today. Kinship, and more specifically descent, has come up frequently in conversations. And my interlocutors seemed determined to make sure I understood how important it was. How important if one could make descent claims that were pride-inducing. How important if one could not claim much, and what a disadvantage that presented. So, as Barth noted in the 50s, and I have also found, in Kurdistan, many socially inflected actions, possibilities, and values are shaped by and flow out of hereditary belonging. specifically in the form of patrilineal. This is the idea that it is mainly men, not women, who socially and legally and ontologically make offspring. Mothers are respected and have a strong influence, but a father's role is idealized as more prominent. Patrilineal, as this idea is known, is so powerful in Kurdistan that I argue that it acts as a kind of third party to which individuals are held accountable by themselves and others. Oh, I forgot that last slide. This is the Parliament building in Erbil. So I put this one up to show a very traditional view of Kurdistan. This is, you could have taken the same picture decades ago. So here is a current. This is actually, you can see the construction crane there that is working on the Parliament building. So even this picture is getting a little old, but Erbil has been transformed. This is the main city, capital city, known in Kurdish as Halab. And it is now a paradoxical place, but a very, very modern place in terms of infrastructure. And here's a supermarket. This is the first supermarket in, as it's known in Arabic and Kurdish. The very first one in Iraq was in Duhok. Duhok is a little town that's not known for having the first of anything. And Duhokis were very, very proud of their supermarket, which are now all over the place. So, at the risk of boring those of you who have had kinship in class or who teach kinship, I'm just going to say a few things about this basic kinship chart, and I have two others. So, in patrilineal, some people matter more than others if you're looking to the past. So, in this case, a square, it means sex or gender doesn't matter for the purposes of what we're talking about. So we have an individual here. And then that person has a mother and a father, and those are biological terms as I'm using them. I am not worrying about gender in this particular moment as I talk about procreation. So this is a very procreative angle on sex and gender. Of course, there are many other angles. So, procreatively speaking, everyone has a mother and a father. So we see this person's parents. We see their grandparents. The triangle is male. The circle is female. We see their parents. We see their parents' parents, and we see the next generation. If your parents are cousins, you have 6 sets of great-grandparents. Great-grandparents. If you are not a product of cousin marriage, you have 8. And you really have to draw it out to understand how that works, which is fun. I love to draw these. I draw a lot of these in the field. This is a very highly idealized one in which we're looking back in time. Okay? We have the square looking back in time. We're going to look forward in time in a couple of slides. So, if we look at this, you might want to think about your own knowledge of the past. Okay, do I know the names of my parents, biological parents? If you're adopted, you might not. Do I know the names of my grandparents, etc.? So we all have different amounts of knowledge about these people. For the most part, in a non-patrilineal culture, I would say Norway is largely not patrilineal. Europe has patrilineal hanging around in various royal families, etc. But largely, Europe and Scandinavia, Southern Europe has got more patrilineal, or for the most part not patrilineal. And so, if you know the names of people going back in time, you may know as many women as men. You may know more female names. You may not be able to name all great-grandparents. You might not know the names of 8 great-grandparents, but you may know several names of great-grandparents. You may know some stories. You may have met them. Here's what it looks like in patrilineage. This is a very oversimplified chart like the other one. That first one is very oversimplified. This one is to show you an ideal type, to show you the basics of how it works. In general, in patrilineage, our individual person knows the names of their parents, and they know the names of all 4 grandparents. But the next generation up from there is where the patriline gets going. And as I interview people, they know the name of their father's father's father. And let me say this, prestige goes along with being able to name more fathers. So if you don't know the name of your father's father's father, this is painful, probably. This is difficult. This means you do not have a lot of prestige from descent. Now, there are entrepreneurs everywhere in the world, including in Kurdistan. And so, if you're very entrepreneurial and know how to surmount social difficulties, maybe you'll be just fine and have a nice life without knowing the name of your father's father's father. But if you do know his name, this is really, really helpful. And it keeps going. So notice, our person here knows the same people that we might know in a bilateral culture. Norway is filed under bilateral, so it's the United States. But then we start listing fathers. Some people can go 8 or 9 listing names. Some people claim descent from the Prophet Muhammad. They can't list name. I have not found anyone who can list names beyond 8 or 9 who claims descent from the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. Obviously, that would be more than 8 or 9 fathers. But it's understood that these names keep going, and they were known to those people. Okay? So 9 fathers ago, they would have been able to name 9 fathers, etc. So there's a sense of fidelity of the line. So that's the past. This is a chart showing the future. And I don't go any further with this in this lecture, but I just want to say, as I write about patrilineage and as people ask me about my research and as I discuss it with interlocutors, it's become increasingly clear to me that people are thinking about the future just as much as the past, and maybe more. Okay, so it can be a man's dream to have this. There is very strong son preference in Kurdistan. Women who are married are expected to produce a son. If they don't, they may be distraught. I have seen many, many cases of this. I have heard many stories of women just distraught because they cannot produce a son for their husband. That's about extending the patrilineage into the future. And that really is a dream that is kind of in the air, and it's so understood and so assumed that people may not even talk about it. One time, I published an article called Lineal Masculinity, and I wanted a quote from a man saying, "It's my dream to extend my patrilineage." And I was about to leave Kurdistan, and I didn't have such a quote, and I thought, well, maybe I'm just imagining this. I have this all wrong. So I said so to my friend, and she said, my local Kurdish friend, she said, "Oh, my dad will say that in the first 3 minutes. Do you want to interview him?" I said, "Sure." She said, "You don't even have to bait him. I'll just get him going on the topic, and I'll tell you that." You know what? He did. And he consented to have the data used. And I had the quote that went at the top of the article. That's how I got that. I almost didn't have it. And then I said, "Do you think you're speaking for a lot of men?" He said, "Of course, I'm speaking for every man." Okay, they just didn't say it out loud. Okay, this is the dream, right here. Lots of descendants into the future. Descendants who will remember me. Okay, this is what a man may be thinking. So, patrilineal states and citizenship. Patrilineal has mainly been looked at by anthropologists for the ways in which it organizes a society, which of course it does. But what if we shifted the focus both inward and outward to look at patrilineal heredity belonging in the lives of individuals and as integral to the modern state? In anthropology, we have regarded it as providing structure, and of course it does that, but I think it can be productive to take a simpler look at it as well, to discover what it means for individuals within collectivities. Over and over, as I have interviewed and made observations of social life in Iraqi Kurdistan, patrilineal has played a profound role in the lives of my interlocutors. One example is that of a woman who I knew starting in 1998 and who is an octogenarian now. Dadi Sabiha. I interviewed her multiple times around the turn of the century, and I would love to interview her again. She has moved to a different part of Kurdistan. It's still going strong. I check on her and others. She's not on Facebook. She's not. She told me her life story, which was full of pain and difficulty. Her story included the killing of her father and several other relatives by the Iraqi government, the ways in which she felt oppressed by men, forced displacement, and poverty. She placed a lot of emphasis on gendered relations in her narrative. She talked about the cultural context that encouraged and allowed men to dominate her life. She said she wanted me to pass this on as I published my research. She was not able to choose her life path, had been forced by her stepfather to marry at age 13, had performed female genital cutting operations on several relatives so that they would be seen as loyal to their husbands, and in her young adulthood, had had her movements and choices restricted and controlled by older family members. I interpret the gendered restrictions on her life as the downside of patrilineal. Socio-legal regimes in which patrilineal is emphasized restrict the movement's autonomy and choices of females in favor of creating confidence in paternity. The paternity of each infant must not be in doubt, or ellipsis. Often people were silent. What if the paternity of an infant is in doubt? Silence. When I asked women what would happen if there were any doubt as to who had fathered their children, sometimes they said dramatic things like, "Then my life would be over," or "There would be nothing left to live for." Iraqi Kurdistan has reported a high suicide rate among young women, and I think the remarks I have heard and this rate may be connected. Patrilineal has its downsides. But patrilineal also creates tremendous social value. It allows a person to take part in and see themselves as part of a multi-generational story. Here is a man wearing his armor, his bullets, projectiles, equipment for war. In the 40s, this man has many patrilineal descendants who refer to him very often in conversation. I feel like I know him. He's from way back. We didn't overlap at all, but I feel like I know him. I'm going to tell you the story of a man who I interviewed from a different family who's not connected to this man, but I put this up here to show you an early ancestor, about 3, 4, 5 generations ago. So here is a kinship chart of one of my interlocutors. And this chart resulted from an interview that was hours long, involved a lot of tea and munchies, etc. I'm calling him Ahmad Beg. These are real people on here. I have IRB requirements, as I'm sure you do too, Institutional Review Board. We have to follow certain ethical requirements. This particular family is so large that if I just erase a couple of generations of names, I have anonymity. So these are real names. And I challenge anyone to get anywhere close to figuring out who this is, because it could be many different people. So this is from the Barwadi tribe, or Ashiret. Tribe is a word I'm trying not to use anymore, because it's problematic in anthropology, and yet in Kurdistan, Ashiret is used all of the time. It is still a very prominent concept. So I can't go into all the details about this chart, but I said to Ahmad Beg, tell me about your ancestors. And this is what I got. Again, it took us hours because he had stories about all of these people. And all of these people are in his head. Okay? He told me about them off the top of his head. He knew all their names. He had many details about them. In each generation, there is a lineage head. Okay, lineage heads are in Barth's work a lot. That's the man who is seen as in charge, being in charge. Now there's a lot of variety. You can have a lineage that is relatively egalitarian, and 4 or 5 men seem to be in charge, and they're not really going to make any decision without consulting the other. Or you can have a very strong leader, and he just makes decisions. There can be collective wealth involved. They're usually in the form of land. Could be in the form of sheep. These days it could be in the form of oil stock in a company. Oil has been discovered. More about that later. So in this generation, the third one up, we see there was a leader named Muhammad, and he was in charge for a while, and then followed by Rashid. Then we go up, and we see a move. Thinking about patrilineage and migration is really interesting. It's endlessly interesting, because there is a lot of moving around in Kurdistan, even as there's a lot of claiming of places. And sorting all of that out deserves its own monograph, for sure. I have a chapter in my book, Kurdistan on the Global Stage, called A Man on the Land. And I argued that places make patrilineal identity as a man moves to land. Okay, so in this 4th generation up, he notes that this leader moved to Dabsesh village, which is an important place if you're a Barwadi. You know Dabsesh, probably, or you're supposed to. Half the Barwadis are in Nashville, by the way. Maybe they don't know Dabsesh. Forgetting. That's what happens. It's migration. Next village up, we have a ruler in Qomri Castle. Qomri is a wonderful place. It's so beautiful. There's a castle on the top of this craggy mountain that looks. At first I thought, oh, how beautiful. Then I thought, okay, what would motivate you to build your castle up there? It's kind of like the question about Oxford still standing. And it is a ruin now. Okay, so it's not actually functioning. But I did finally have the chance to hike up there. The PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, was occupying it for most of the time I was doing field work, but they had withdrawn, and I was able to hike up there and see the place. We keep going. There is a woman mentioned here. One of these men married the daughter of the Bahdinan prince. So, as a woman, you can be in a patrilineal chart. By the way, this is all verbal. I may be the first person to have written this down. I probably am not. They probably do have charts. I'm sure they do. I'm sure someone has done this, but I haven't seen it. And again, this was all verbal, given to me verbally. So, of course, if someone married well, you'd want to mention that, wouldn't you? So, in order to be on this chart as a woman, there has to be something noteworthy about you. And then we keep going. We keep going to the mid-1600s. Ahmed Beg says. He says, after we get to this generation, we're in the mid-1600s. And before that, there was a man named Hassan Beg, and he came from Turkey. That's all we know. Now, Turkey is very nearby. Actually, the Baghdadi area borders Turkey. Okay, so I said, what does that mean? Came from Turkey. Turkey's right there. We can walk there. That's all he had for me. Maybe Istanbul, maybe hundreds of kilometers away. Maybe not. Okay, so here's a chart showing the richness of patrilineal, the upside of patrilineal. Wow, if you belong to this group, you are walking around with the knowledge of this tremendous heritage that instills a lot of pride and excitement. And again, the desire to tell me the stories. He kept bringing food. His daughters were bringing food. Okay. They kept feeding me and kept talking until I had all of the information he wanted me to know about his patrilineage. Patrilineage is about quotidian social relations, but it also makes possible sectarian Iraqi and more broadly Middle Eastern and West Asian citizenries. Patrilineage is a survivor. It inhabited and maybe even gave rise to early states thousands of years ago, remained as a social and legal form through many empires, and now thrives in the 21st century. Sovereign yet crisis-ridden and militarized autocratic West Asian state. Patrilineage contains and gives rise to certain logics that are useful for states and empires. Middle Eastern sectarian states, and actually that is all of them, even Israel, where dissent is more flexible, but it is still operative. Keep track of two citizenship subcategories. States keep track of two citizenship subcategories, and concern themselves with these two subcategories: religion and ethnicity. How did this get started? Basically, the Ottoman Empire kept track of religion as a category of subject status through the Millet system. Europe had been secularizing since the Protestant Reformation because Europeans also did this with Bethlehem. We had collective, I'm European descent, had collective religion. But the Protestant Reformation initiated a secularization process. An ironic secularization process came out of the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago. Protestantism leading to secularism is an argument by many different scholars. This is very well accepted. And so in Europe by World War I, the meaningful subcategory had come to be ethnicity. What we see in the post-World War I modern states of the Levant to the Gulf, the French and British states of the Levant and Gulf in the early 20th century, is a retention of the Ottoman subcategory and the imposition of a European category with the full consent of elites. Elites did not want the religion subcategory taken away. The prospect, usually coming from Western sources, hey, let's drop this religion thing from citizenship, caused them to recoil at such an intimate colonial imposition. Removing religion would also have meant a loss of power because the new modern states came to control Islamic charity money in the form of endowments controlled by the state. Elites did not want the ethnic category taken away either, because that allowed them to rally their constituents in the face of European colonialism. So, the 19th century was the century of empires increasingly keeping track of religion. The 20th century was the century of modern states increasingly concerning themselves with and defining themselves by ethnicity. Ethno-linguistic categories, really. Ethnicity implies language so often. And the 21st century will be the century of questioning both of these. It is indeed shaping up to be a century of questioning both of these. And my guess and my hope is that by the end of it, we will see a new configuration that reduces the state's concern with both of these categories, allowing freer expression. Patrilineal makes state citizenship categories neat and tidy. The argument that patrilineal makes, remember, I see it as powerful, so powerful that it speaks for itself like a third party, is that all of this is very straightforward. Males make more of their own ethnic and religious categories. It's all very simple. Of course, it is actually more complex than that, and messy, and flexible. But as long as the meaningful social groups in Iraqis or Kurdistanis or Middle Easterners' lives are defined through hereditary means, patrilineage, mal in Kurdish, tribe, ashirat, etc., then confidence in who belongs to them is paramount. And this is also related to conflict. So if those groups who are that are meaningful and are in conflict are potentially in conflict, then it is paramount that one knows who is who. Who is in one's group? How does a person know for sure who is in their group? They must have confidence in paternity, their own, other people's, and their offspring. This is achieved through controlling the female sex. So the female sex will be controlled as long as paternity confidence is paramount, which is as long as knowing who is in patrilineally defined groups is paramount. The quandary. I believe we in anthropology are in a quandary. The world has thousands of ethno-linguistic groups, but only around 200 states. National groups are quickly absorbing smaller ethno-linguistic groups, with language depth accelerating rapidly. Now, this is not in my text, but let me say, here we are in Norway with an English lecture. Language depth is happening rapidly. 20 years ago, Wycliffe Bible translators, the people who count this stuff with the most vigor, they counted about 7,000 languages. And today it's getting down near 5,000. It's an incredible drop-off. And it's accelerating. These people, 8 billion of us now, we live in 200-ish modern states, approximately. National groups are quickly absorbing smaller ethno-linguistic groups. Global languages, such as English, are absorbing national languages. And yet, we in anthropology have turned to the very specific and shied away from generalizing. This is what I think we have done, my observation. I'm not Sherry Order. Anyone know that 1984 article? She tells us what we're doing. We need someone to write that article now. I think they would say that. This person writing the article about what sociocultural anthropologists are doing now. We've shied away from generalizing. We work in the whole world, but it seems we are reluctant to talk about the whole world, except for those ways in which various global flows impact and adhere on our interlocutors. I think that Fredrik Barth, had he kept living and doing fieldwork well into this century, would have again turned to ethnic groups and boundaries, but in a way that was both less universalizing. He was trying to, in that volume, oh, I have it right here. I brought this to show you. It's my copy. It goes back to, I think, 98, the year it was reissued. And it's full of notes from back then. I read it as a grad student. I taught with it. This is my copy of his Kurdistan work, which I knew immediately that I had to buy when I became a student of Kurdistan. I bought it before I went to the field the first time. That's very cool and very special to me. So he was looking for a way to capture what was going on with ethnic groups in the whole world, and the volume is diverse. It has lots of different cases, and it caught on like wildfire. I don't think he realized that this would be his most cited work, the introduction to ethnic groups and boundaries. So he was looking for something that we could say about the whole world. I think if we extend this desire to look at the whole world in a way that is actually local and regional and sensitive to the individual, we can keep this project going in productive ways and some new ways. We have to acknowledge the present post-colonial and globalized moment as we do so. I met Barth in 2007 at the American Anthropological Association meeting. I sought him out. I had wanted to meet him for a long time. And I was like a little groupie at a rock concert waiting. Saw him. I went to the event I knew he would be at. Saw him and I waited. And we had a wonderful conversation. He was very gracious to spend a lot of time talking with me. He said, "Oh, my Kurdistan work. Oh, yeah. I was really young. I didn't really know what I was doing." He was very shy about it. And yet I said, no, it was so inspiring to me, and there are many threads. I read it, I went there, and I thought, wow, there's so many similarities, even though so many things have also changed. Later I corresponded with him. His email address was swatsult@gmail.com. Isn't that awesome? I told him how much his work had meant to me. I used ethnic groups and boundaries in teaching. I was inspired by his work in Kurdistan, etc. Barth's field sites in the 21st century are places of autocracy, civil war, or both. International coalitions of neo-colonizers have invaded. These places are militarized zones. Refugees flow out. Life is hard. Most of these places, from Kurdistan to Pakistan to Sudan to Iran, are sectarian. A citizen stands before the state as a member of an ethno-religious category. These categories are compulsory, assigned at birth. They're transmitted patrilineally. Moreover, ethnicity is patrilineally transmitted. And though this is a complicated story, given that ethnicity can be changed voluntarily or through forced assimilation, the states in the Barth zone of the world are not only sectarian, but many prioritize one ethnic group. This prioritizing periodically reaches extremes, such as when the Arab nationalist Iraqi government perpetrated attempted genocide against the Kurds, or when the Sudanese government did so in Darfur. If we anthropologists just write about our own interlocutors and their local and transnational worlds, we can tell great stories and produce something of value. But if we compare, we increase the value of our work. I want us to do this more so that our work can have more practical application and make the world a better place. Many citizens of the states where Barth worked oppose sectarianism. At this moment, activists are busy and taking historic risks to try to change it. They are addressing the power of patrilineal, whether they are saying so or not. Patrilineal is not simply culture. It is at the heart of legal regimes that will change. The Arab Spring failed, but as my Kurdish friends like to say, and give a pregnant gesture, this is their gesture, wait. The Arab Spring failed. Wait. My hope is that activism and scholarship will come together in ways that they have only tentatively so far. When I taught in Kurdistan, many of my students expressed joy at learning that patrilineal was a thing and had a name. They were joyful because it had had wide-ranging impacts on their lives, and there can be joy in having a name for something impactful that was previously not named. And some activist expressions followed. May they find life-giving ways forward through patrilineal and hereditary belonging's many possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane, for a wonderful lecture. We have a small token of appreciation. The edited volume Anthropology in Norway. As a token of our appreciation for this insightful and inspiring lecture on a topic which to many of us are close to our hearts.
Thank you very much.